Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the binge factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Binge Factor. I'm Tracy Hazard and I have Nicole Christina today. Zestful Aging. I love that title, Zestful. It has everything you'd want in a title. It's getting you excited about it. It's getting you interested in, I want that. If you're not there yet, maybe you want that. And if you are already there, then you want to be in a place where it is already zestful. So I love that title. I think it's a really great one. And Nicole Christina is a pro. Zestful Aging Podcast is a multi-award winner. It is heard in 106 countries, has more than 350 interviews, and Nicole Christina's guests are change makers from a variety of disciplines: filmmakers, writers, advocates, poets, musicians, scientists, athletes, entrepreneurs, many of whom are top experts in their fields. She calls herself the Terry Gross of Aging Well. The podcast is also broadcast on the public radio in Syracuse, New York. And Nicole is the author of the book, Not Just Chatting, How to Become a Master Podcast Interviewer. That's why I invited her on the show today. She is a contributor to the online magazine, Crunchy Tales, Smart Stories for Late Bloomers. And her show, Zestful Aging, is a whole lot of fun to listen to. Such a professional interviewing model from a psychotherapist and clinician. So you're going to love this. There's something about really doing a great job with interviewing people. There's an exchange of energy. And that's what you're going to really see here with Nicole and I. And I'm so glad you're going to witness this. So take a listen to Nicole Christina, Zestful Aging. Nicole, I'm so glad to talk to a master interviewer. I love that. Master podcast interviewer. It's so wonderful to have someone think of themselves that way, because I think too often there's a lot of success and masterfulness that comes over many, many episodes of doing it. But we got to keep upping our skills on the other side of it. And not enough podcasters do that. They just like set it and forget it, kind of like do their model. And they're not improving those interview skills. And I've listened to your first episode and I listened to your 300th and something. There's a big difference there. And yet interviewing is your profession.
I love interviewing. And I think I really started to gain confidence when I was interviewing these people who have been interviewed a lot. And I kept getting the feedback. That was the best interview I've ever had. And there were times when I just got teary about that. I just was like, I think I found my sweet spot. And it was just so consistent. And I thought, I want to pay attention to what I'm doing and what I could do more of, and what I want to watch people who are really, really the big names. So I paid attention to people who were doing talk shows. And I thought, what are they doing that I think is great and really evokes a connection? And what are they doing that's leaving money on the table? And by money, I mean emotional connection and more good stuff, because everybody can talk on a superficial level. And many of our guests have done this so many times that it's in the can for them, right? And so our job is to kind of get underneath the sound bites. And there's ways to do that are not difficult. You just have to learn it. It's pretty straightforward once you know the secret formula.
I'm so glad you said that, because my least favorite person to interview is someone who's media trained.
Oh, yeah.
I really dislike it because they work so hard to work back to their sound bites that they're really not even consciously in the interview process. That's what I found. They're almost overtrained, right? And it's terrible
Absolutely.
interview. And
Mhm.
today I yell at the TV when I'm watching a bad interview. It frustrates me. I'm like, you didn't ask the good question. Where's the follow-up? Like you
What are
just
you doing?
yeah, like it's your job, That and bad microphones in the pandemic. Those are the two pet peeves, the two
So
things
you
that got me yelling at the TV, right? It's like
okay,
microphones
that's
are cheap, like get a good one.
good. Yeah, yeah, wear headphones.
Yes,
That's
and wear
right.
headphones, exactly, yeah, those are the 3 things that get me yelling at it, but you're so right that getting under that is it's the long tail process of podcasting where you have to be on for much longer than your 5-minute spot on media. That's really helps things, but not everybody's comfortable in that, and so we have to be better interviewers. What kinds of things do you do that really help you raise that bar?
Thanks for that question. Let me start at the way beginning because, and now I'm going to sound like a therapist, so you're going to have to cut me some slack. We have to establish safety and trust. And the way we do that is totally unsexy and it's a little boring, but we need to come off as totally professional and totally like, I have done this so many times, you are in good hands. We don't want to leave our guests saying, so is this going to be live? Is it going to, how long? We want to come in and provide real structure and like, I totally got you. Now, particularly for me, because they know I'm a therapist and I want to dispel any, idea that I'm going to, get
Stick in
inside their
their
head.
head, yeah.
Exactly. But I've guested a lot because I have an interesting niche in the therapy field, and we can talk about that later if you want to. But I've talked to some really successful podcasters, and they're kind of sending me these little emails, and it's it's not really structured professionally. So I send a PDF and I just go through everything and I talk about like even down to like earpod doesn't have a great mic. This is what you need. This is what you need. This is what you need. And my logo is on that and everything is really polished. So I want them to feel like they're dealing with a pro. And I think that really provides safety and trust. And so what we get with that, I mean, besides being decent humans, is we allow them to be vulnerable because they feel like, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. And so now I can open up a little bit more. And that's what gives us the juice because nobody wants more information. We want some kind of human connection and we want our audience to feel like, I wish I could be in this conversation. It's so juicy, it's so real, and it's so compelling. So we want to set the stage first of all. I think that's really important. And then there's some other techniques, and some of them you do so beautifully. I mean, I just come to it like, hey, I'm meeting a new friend. Of course I'm gonna, like it's goodwill. We're collaborating to have a really lovely conversation. It helps both of us, right? So we just start there. And I know this is so hackneyed and some of these words, I'm like, I can't even believe I'm using them because they're so overused, but I am so naturally curious that I wouldn't care if I was meeting this person at the bus stop. And once I was taking a hike and I was chatting up this person looking at a map, and my friend said, did you know that guy? It's like, no. But I just like to meet people and find out about them. So that's
Me
just
too,
me.
that's why
All
we connect
right.
here, I can
So
tell, yeah.
exactly. It's like, of course that's
I
going to
know.
happen.
Tom always, my husband always jokes that I've never read a book I didn't like, and I've never met a person an interview that I didn't like, right? And I was like, well, part of it is because I have really good screening mechanisms, and that's what I want to ask you about next. Like, I don't
Yes.
pick up a book or invite someone to my show if I'm not already curious and interested. So I already
There's,
have kind of natural
yeah.
screeners. What do you have in your process of
Well, I will tell you
curating
what
guests?
I'll tell you what my husband says, which is a little embarrassing. He says, did you make them cry? Which is not my intent. But when you're talking about zestful aging, I'm of the age where life has kind of kicked you in the butt a few times. And now, we're talking about resilience. People do get tearful. Can be an emotional topic. So, what do I do? Exactly what you said. There are millions of wonderful guests. Only bring people on your show that you care about because you can't fake it. I mean, I'm not that interested in there's some things I wish I would do more of, but like the financial aspect of aging, I have people on just because they have a really interesting little hyper niche. But like just doing like, let's talk about finances and into your future and that's not me. I'm much more about, oh, you're going to send Quentin to help these aging inmates by teaching them hospice skills. That's what I want to hear about. So I'm a clinical social worker. I like things that are off the mainstream and that are humanitarian. And I can tell you about some extreme examples of guests I've had at some point in our talk that give you just like that's what I'm looking for. I know what I'm looking for. And unfortunately, because I love interviewing so much, we talked about this off mic. There are a lot of people who interest me, and
You
now
got a
I'm
little bit
having
of
to
a
say,
backlog.
I got a backlog. Yeah. So I'm really trying to, I say to people, please contact me in 6 months, knowing full well that's not even going to be enough time.
But, finding those guests, I think when someone's about to start a podcast or early on their podcast, or they haven't really I think part of it is when they don't dial into what they're most interested in and what their
Mm,
audience most interested in. I think that's where it falls apart most. And you've definitely done that. You know what you're
mhm.
looking for, you know what you're providing to your audience. You're very clear on that. How do you then decide this person's worthy or I'm going to go? Where do you go find them?
Well, they find me now. Because I didn't know this when I started, but this is all the rage now, talking about aging well. So I just happened to find myself in a really hot subject matter right now. So I don't really do that anymore. I've been doing this for 6 years. So I just want to establish it hasn't always been this way. But one of my little techniques, and maybe everybody does this, but if I'm interviewing a guest who I think is really, really interesting and well connected, I will say to them, who do you know that would be a great guest? And people will send me documents that are like, you got to interview this person. She works at the UN on aging. Here's her email. You got to interview this person. Discovered this. Here's her email. So when you can, and maybe this is obvious, I don't know, but what I would do then is have an email and I'd say, Susie Johnson sent me, and then your email gets opened. And sometimes people will say, I can't be on your podcast because, I'm on Oprah or something, that's fine. But normally they will respond. And what they might say, and this happened to me once, is, I'm not your guy, but I'll tell you who is. The guy who does this is my colleague. He's a professor at University of Washington. Here's the email. And then I say, so and so sent me, and you're in.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, we don't often ask enough from our own connections. Like I think that
Hmm.
we get into the moment of the interview, we get to the end of it and we just don't say who would be great for me next.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's the perfect time to be asking for that. So I'm glad you do that. Now, you mentioned and left us a little teasing with some weird guess, weird
I have
stories.
some.
If I don't
Mm,
ask it, I would be my
okay.
audience should be yelling at
Yeah,
their phone or at whatever they're listening on, right?
okay. I have a couple. I mean, I have so many that are so beautiful, and they're like I feel like they're like my children. Who do you like best? But people love to hear the story, and they joke me about it. I talked about it at Podfest. So I had played tennis for the National Senior Games, and I found myself, well, I knew I was going to be in Florida. And I uh I was made aware of a woman in her 60s who removes Burmese pythons from the Everglades.
Whoa.
Yeah. So that's the expression I get a lot. These things they have eaten all of the mammals and they're invasive. They're apex predators. So literally they have changed the environment. And this woman, a lot of documentaries have been made about her. She's on Nature, she's on PBS. They had a Japanese film crew come. She's like this sort of petite woman who doesn't need to work. I'm going to tell you, because her husband is a big time attorney in Miami. She goes out every night at midnight because these guys don't hang around in the day, and she pulls them out of the glades. So I said, Donna Khalil, I am going to be in Fort Lauderdale. Can I come ride shotgun with you? And she said, see, you're like about ready to pass out. She said, yeah, of course. I'll have a volunteer with me. So, I showed up. She has a truck that's all decked out in python skin. And she does this. People think like, oh, she's such a badass. And she is, because she just goes into these places where there are also crocs and alligators and things and she, with her hands, scoops them out. And if you really want to see a great, crazy picture, go on Facebook and look up Donna Khalil, Kalil. And she's really a heroine in that she's not doing this to be like, look at me, I have this documentary. She grew up in Florida, and these predators are taking over the glades, and they're really damaging the ecosystem. So people always like that one, and I still can't
I
believe
love
I
that
did
one.
it.
And I have a thing about snakes. So.
Now, most people do. And, she said to me, oh, the volunteer didn't show up. You may have to hold the tail. And I was like,
like, I didn't sign up for that.
I did not sign up for that. And I just found it so fascinating. I was sitting, we're looking, and I'm up in the back of her pickup truck with this huge spotlight, looking. And I got kind of bruised because it's a bouncy, and so you're hit, it's not my usual
What an
everyday.
experience.
It
I
was
love
such
it.
an experience. So we saw a lot of wildlife. We didn't see any pythons that day because they had been mating, and I guess they were taking a little bit of a break. But it was how would I have ever done that had I not been a podcaster, right? And I just felt so appreciative and in awe of her letting me go along. The other one that comes to mind, and I'll try to get through it without getting choked up. I interviewed a woman who's a humanitarian attorney. She's no longer practicing. She's in the Netherlands, and she has done all kinds of work in Sarajevo and Sudan. She wrote a book on young women who were resistance fighters in World War II. They were Dutch women, teenagers, and they would lure the Nazi officers into the park and shoot them. The book is called Seducing and Killing Nazis. So this is Sophie Poldermans. She writes this book. We have a great interview. And then I decide years later, I'm going to go to Amsterdam because I want to see, I have to see the Anne Frank house. So I said to Sophie, are you going to be in town? She said, not only am I going to be in town, but I just published a new book on these women. One of them is named Honey Troost, and she's buried near Sophie's home. And I said, can we meet up? I'm going to interview you. So I interviewed Sophie at the cemetery where this woman was executed 3 weeks before the war was over, and the cemetery is all resistance fighters. So I found myself, with my little Shure mic that plugs into my iPhone, which is very excellent if anybody wants to do remote interviews, talking to her about at the grave of this woman who lured Nazis into as a teenager and shot them. So oh, where are you going from there? Is what
Well,
I
first
sound
off, my parents used to live in The Hague, right down the street from the Peace Palace. So, like, I know how beautiful that is and how historic it is. So, you being there and doing your interview is just giving me chills
Oh,
because
I've
it
got
must have
yeah,
been so amazing, like, to be able
yeah,
to do that. And I think
yeah.
too often podcasters aren't brave enough to go do a live if it's not where you do all of your episodes. And so I love that you kind of interchange between the two.
I don't have tons of live, but I'll tell you what I'm gonna do, and it's gonna drive my friends crazy. We're walking on the Camino, a part of the Camino, which is a pilgrimage in Spain, in May. And three of my tennis friends, and I am bringing that little microphone because it's excellent. And I am going to just interview the hell out of every cool person I see who's doing something that I think my listeners would really appreciate. We all want to have adventures and feel alive and vibrant. And so I feel like I can share this with people and inspire them to say, hey, I'm 65, but I'm not dead. I mean, I want to have adventures too.
Oh.
So that's what I bring.
Well, I think that's so interesting for your audience to come along. And I think that this is really something that is a thread through all of your 350 plus episodes that you've got, that you have the unique ability to find an interesting subject and be brave about it. Be brave about talking about it. Be brave about inviting
Mm.
that person on it. And I think that's the energy of your entire show, Zestful Aging, is it's just this braveness of saying,
Aw.
"Hey, I'm good with this. All right. This is the next adventure." And your show is like that as well. So I think every time we get into a different subject, and you've covered some subjects that I think everybody's covering. Like I think I listen one of your more recent ones I listened to was on the weight loss drugs, but you covered
Oh,
it
yeah.
from the perspective of what it's like when you're over 50 and taking the weight loss drugs,
Yeah.
right? Which I
Mm.
haven't heard yet anywhere. Very
I
interesting perspective on it.
I wonder if part of what you're picking up, and thank you so much for that compliment, is as a therapist, I've heard everything. And so I can sit with a lot of discomfort. And that's what I noticed, not to call out David Letterman, but he was interviewing someone, I think it was Kanye. I wouldn't want to have to do that. But like there were these emotional nuggets that were put out, and then David Letterman just like, "Oh, let me tell you about my son. Oh, that like happened to me. Oh, that." And I was like, "What are you doing?" And this is something you said earlier when we were meeting. You have to do the follow-up. And if I could just, it's the devil is in the details. Don't just take what they're saying at face value. And I surprise myself because I kind of think, I've been doing this for a long time, been a therapist for 32 years, pretty much know what people are going to say. I'm wrong like 80% of the time. And so when I
I
say
love
to
that when it
people,
surprises you, right?
oh my God, I'm like, oh, I didn't see that coming. But like, I will say things that are not they're not genius. They're just like, "What do you mean by that?" Or, "Can you reflect more on that?" Or, "How did you do that?" Or, "Say more." Or, "What surprised you?" And that's where the gold is because even if they're not rehearsed, on shows or whatever, it makes them, like, say, "Oh, let me get you some new information. Let me be thoughtful about that." And so you're going beneath these sound bites. I am not here to offer sound bites to my audience. They can have that anywhere. I want to offer a really compelling and sensitive and thoughtful conversation that they feel like they wish they could, you know, contribute to.
Well, I think, when I was mentioning before about how your show is, this is what I'm always looking for. That I call it the binge factor, obviously, because that's the name of
Mm,
my show, right? But I
right.
call it that. But that thing that makes somebody want to come back to you again and again, what is unique about you. And in this particular way, it is getting to that insightful level of a conversation with someone that we are not always skilled in. I mean, you're absolutely right. David Letterman was not very skilled in that. I personally think it's because his ego was in the way of him.
I
Yeah,
think
I think he
that's
could do it, but I think
yeah,
there's ego there. That's just my opinion on that.
right.
I'm not a professional, but
But yes.
that's what I think it was. But you look at that and say, in order to get to that insightfulness, you have to have that natural curiosity that you have, but you're looking for that understanding of, how do I apply this to my zestful aging mission, my messaging? And so
Mhm.
you're looking for where that insight lies, not just insightful to just have somebody, dig deep. Like, it's not just for that. It's to get to that point of, what is your audience really interested in? And we talked about this at the beginning before I turned on our mics here, and that you're really always with this high quality content focus, that you're thinking about how your audience is receiving what you're bringing, who you're bringing on, and what you're asking them. That, I'm sure, has evolved over time in your show.
Now, let me give you an expression I
Yeah.
bet you've never heard of because it's so kind of esoteric. But this is what we used to learn when I was in training to be a therapist, even hovering attention, where exactly what you're saying is you're listening for, like, I want my audience to be interested. Where am I going? Where have I been? Where am I now? And you cannot be scrolling on Facebook or whatever you're scroll. You, in fact, one and I heard your episode about going video. Sometimes when I'm interviewing, my eyes are closed because I'm concentrating so hard on being both in the moment, appreciating where we just came from, and then what like little half step or where do I want to guide them to fulfill the submission of, how are you going to help us age more zestfully? So to me, there's so many levels going on. It takes full concentration, and people batch interviews. I'm like, I don't know what kind of breakfast and protein you're eating, but I cannot do that because it's a full body experience for me. And there have
It's for
been
me too.
too,
I
yeah,
agree with,
yeah,
yeah, when we used to try to batch record because we did 20 episodes a month on my very first podcast on 3D printing that we talked about beforehand. So
yeah.
20 episodes a month, only 4 of those were interviews, the rest were conversations. And so between me and my partner, so we thought we could batch them, but I couldn't get through more than 3 without just completely being drained. And that is because if you're all in it with the attention span required to be present and future thinking and past
Hmm.
thinking, right? Like, that is not an easy place to be. It's
Hmm.
a very different energy level. I love that you bring that, and I'm very sure that's the therapist in you that is bringing that thoroughness to it and that consideration to it. But I think it's really adds so much to your show in just that high quality attention that you're looking to bring. It's coming through absolutely in
Oh,
everything you
thank you.
do. So you
That
should be
means a
very proud
lot
of
to
that.
me. I mean, there are many episodes where I have to gather myself because, like, I interviewed these 2 women and they were in their 50s. They're climate scientists, and I had to interview in the North Pole. And they got stuck up there in COVID because the boat that takes them there. Do you know the story?
I have heard
Parts
about
in
them
the
getting
ice.
stuck up there. Yeah.
And they're no electricity, no internet. Their hut is the size of literally a walk-in closet. And, I'm talking to them through satellite. So it sounds like that, Houston, Houston, are you, at the end of it, I almost not, I mean, we had finished and wrapped up. I just sat there and I got tearful. I thought, how do I get to do this? Because it brings a whole level of, um, it's just, to me, it's just why I exist,
It's the
what
intangible of podcasting that I really wish everyone would be able to tap into. And it's not everyone's
Mhm.
forte. You can very clearly see that and I can hear that when I listen to people's shows, that not everyone gets that intangibleness from it that is I don't know, it feeds my soul. That's how I look at it.
That's
Mm.
it. That's
Yeah.
the best way to say it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But people are always looking for the return on investment. And we talked a little bit about this beforehand as well. Is like this idea you have an ad sponsor rich niche, right? Like the aging, who doesn't want to advertise something about aging? But you've chosen
Mhm.
not to go down that path. Let's talk a little bit about, why you're being very careful about that path.
Well, some of the things that let me tell you what my goals are first, and maybe that would help. I'm also streamed on public radio. So to me, that was like, okay, uh, died and went to heaven on that one. And then I really want to get my own show on public radio or public TV. So I have a little bit of a different goal. I work as a clinical social worker, I'm a therapist, I have a specialty in eating disorders at midlife. I've no shortage of interest in that. And I've trained a lot for it. So I do work in that realm. I went through a period of time where sponsors were contacting me. A lot of the stuff was anti-aging. I'm like, I'm sorry, I am not about that. Other people are, but I'm not really interested. And I'm so protective of my audience. I'm really afraid that I just want to be super snobby about anything that comes on my show because you know what it's like. It is really lovely and it's really hard work. I mean, you have to have some grit, in my way of thinking, to keep going every single episode. Sometimes I don't want to. I'm like, "Oh, I kind of want to go, hang out with my girlfriends and, knit or do so or travel or whatever." No, you got a podcast and it's got to, you got to do it. So, um, I guess I was thinking about like, how do I do this? I went to Podfest. Everyone's about monetizing. And I thought, what do I have to do to monetize this and how would it look? And what came to me, my weird epiphany as I was flying back from podcast is I want to do less, not more. And to quote our friend Alex Sanfilippo, and I just did a little training for him. Um, I want to have such a high quality podcast that it stands on its own and it's sort of the cream that rises to the crop. Now, maybe that will never happen, but I feel like my job is to offer something to people that they can't get anywhere else. I put my heart into it, and that whatever's going to come, and I think that's going to come by way of collaboration, by the way, because I have people in that, I'm collaborating with all the time. I think there's a mystery there. Maybe this goes against your business sense, and probably people are like, oh my gosh, woo woo, no thanks. But I'm in a space where I'm like, let's see what happens. I have people in my local community who are interested in the podcast. I feel like there's gonna be something that really, comes up that I could never have anticipated, and my job is just to keep doing what I'm doing. If I had a sponsor that I really believed in and I thought was really valuable, I would consider it, but I don't want for $35 or whatever they pay you, I don't wanna be doing some, like, "Hey, make your skin look nicer with this anti-aging cream." That's just not me, so
Yeah, no, I can totally feel that. I am actually not a fan. I mean, my whole business is called Podetize, right?
I
Monetize and
know.
podcast together. Like, but I am not a fan of that type of monetization where you're
Okay.
giving away your audience. I think it has diminishing returns. So I think when you go
Mhm.
for the quick buck in that, at the long run, you lose.
That's interesting, and it's not that much money.
No, it's not worth it, and that's what we don't understand. We're, like, so desperate
Mhm.
to make and I think this is psychologically, I mean, maybe you're the expert here, so maybe you could answer what this is, but I think it's, I don't wanna be seen as wasting my money on something that's not making me money, so they wanna look to offset that and break even so that they can justify doing something that they love, right? Or that they're enjoying. And
Yes.
I was like, who are you? I mean, most of my clients are solopreneurs. Who are you justifying their money spend to? Like,
Mhm.
you you don't have to, right? And that's really where I think the mindset of it comes in, is like, where are we focused? And I love that your focus is really on that audience first, but that you also have a mission.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
I think that's
that
right.
where it wants to go, and that requires a high quality level. You don't get on national public radio without it being valuable. It just
And,
isn't going to work.
also, like, I anticipated you saying, "What would you recommend?" I'm gonna tell you, this is my new nickname, Dog with a Bone. I mean, I'm like, if there's somebody I wanna meet, I'm advertising in one of my local towns, because everyone here is a zestful ager, and, I just noticed that this woman, had an account in this other market, so I contacted her. She's like, "Oh, yeah, sure, let me hook you up." And, like, I just am a dog with a bone, and I just don't give up, maybe when I should, but I've just found that if you ask, people say, "Oh, yeah, sure," and that's been my model, is like, it's all about goodwill. It's not, it's not about, like, taking, 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 but it really feels like it feels very mutual and very respectful, and that's how I wanna operate.
That's how I love about the podcast space. It does feel very respectful and mutual, like we're all in it together to grow this beautiful ecosystem,
Aw.
and the ones who are really working it deserve respect. So that's why I love that. Now, you could have written a book about all those funny and interesting stories of people you've interviewed around the
Yeah.
topic of zestful aging, but you chose to write the book, Not Just Chatting, Master Podcast Interviewer. Like, tell me a little bit about why you made that choice.
Um, I felt like, how in podcasting and probably in other places too, it's like you've got this material. How do you want to use it in all of the ways, right? And I was like, I've been a therapist for a long time. I know how to help people feel at ease. I know how to be supportive. I know how to help them talk about hard stuff. Why don't I use what I know and offer that to the podcasting community? The other thing that I will say, and maybe you're like, yeah, no kidding, but I give this book out. When I went to Podfest, I just started giving them out. They're small, little paperbacks, and they don't cost me that much, but I found that people really appreciate, and they ask you to sign it, and I just feel like it's a great way to start a relationship if that's the kind of stuff they're interested. So I was on a panel at Podfest and sort of talking about some different stuff. And then I said, hey, if anyone wants a book, I'm giving them away. I mean, there was like a line at my, they say free, whatever. Hopefully, they thought it'd be valuable. And I just find it to be such a great conversation starter and a goodwill builder. So that's how I met Alex. I saw his stuff and I'm like, I'm sending this guy a book down in Florida. And and so that's how I got to know him and be on his show and all of that
Right,
stuff.
and that's how we met, of course, on Podmatch.
Yeah, of course, and
Of
which is
course.
a brilliant and elegant
Oh, it's a great solution, yeah,
it's
and it's
so
one of my
well
favorite.
done.
But what I like really about it for me is I get to meet someone in an interesting, different niche. So, like, I'm pretty picky. Like, I mean, it serves us up. I don't even know, like 6 or 7 a day, and I probably pick 3 or 4 a month. So I'm really picky, because
Yes.
I'm looking for somebody who's got an interesting podcast area I've never discussed before, or got an interesting perspective that I haven't heard before. That's what I'm looking for. So I use it as that sort of creative kind of
Great.
like, who have I missed that I haven't even considered, that
Yes.
hasn't come across my desk before, right? And that's
Perfect.
how I use it. But
Yeah, it's
it really
great.
is wonderful that you put this book out, because I think your perspective on being a person who's asked questions for a living, right, helps all of us up our game. And that, I think, is essential to this idea of being curious and continually learning. Podcasting is inherently flexible. And my favorite part is that our audience comes along with us. And so we're at a different day and time than they were when they first started listening to you 300 plus episodes ago, right?
That's
And they're
true.
here and they're waiting for that next thing. What are they ready for? Maybe your audience is ready to start, putting their voice out there. Who knows? So they want to follow in your podcast footsteps. It happens all the time.
Yeah. The other thing I'm doing just for fun is, of course, and I've heard you talk about it on your podcast, is guesting is the thing, right? Everybody wants to guest. Well, I've guested a lot because I have this kind of obscure specialty. And I realized that people need help prepping for guesting. And I don't mean in the way maybe a lot of people do. I'm not about anxiety. I'm talking about how do you show up in a way where you feel confident, but also relaxed. And what does it feel like to have an exchange of ideas? This isn't about me like telling you everything I know about whatever I do. It's about us feeling both energized at the end of the conversation. So I thought like that's kind of a fun thing is to prep people for interviews in a way that, as you say, is a bit of a different perspective. A lot of people get really nervous. So let's talk about anxiety reduction before you go on. What's that going to look like?
Wow. I love that idea because, sometimes you don't really think about that idea that I got to work more on myself, right? I got to work a little bit on myself first and keep going back to that David Letterman conversation. Right?
Yes, that's right.
Well, Nicole Christina, Zestful Aging, one of the most wonderful podcasts I've come across in a long time. And I listen to a lot of podcasts. I have now recommended it to about 5 or 6 other people because, if it's not obvious, I am in your age demographic. And
It is
may
not
be totally
obvious.
Yeah, I get that. And I thank goodness for my beautiful genetics. But this niche, this conversation needs to be happening. And this is the beautiful thing about our podcasting ecosystem. There's a space for everything. And Zestful Aging, such a great perspective, such a great show. Thank you, Nicole Christina.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight.
I think it takes a lot to keep going when you hit 350 episodes and keep going with interviewing. And when everything about your life is interviewing, it is not the easiest thing to do. Meeting guests, getting new stories, pulling that out, not being bored with the process, that is a challenge. Nicole is just a master at that, as you've heard. It's kind of her forte, right? It's the way she's been and everything she does in her professional life has always been about asking great questions and really building up to this. But I think there's so much in podcast interviews that is getting worse and worse in the rest of the marketplace that it's really refreshing to see someone who is completely energized by the process along the way. So be thinking more about that as you're listening to her show and checking this out, is be thinking about that this isn't just an experience that is built up over 367 episodes at the time we recorded this or something like that it's experience that builds up with it, but it is actually an energetic part of who she is and how she does that. So how can you be building that for yourself? And then if you really are feeling like you just want to master this podcast interviewing process, don't forget to pick up our book, Not Just Chatting, Master Podcast Interviewing. That is just such an important part of where we're going to go in the future. And anyone who can keep that up can sustain a podcast for a really long period of time. And that's what I want you to realize when both listening to the show, reading your book, and checking out our interview here. So thank you for staying with us. As always, I'm looking for great podcasters out there. So if you have anyone you can suggest, someone you've been a guest on, someone you have interviewed, someone that you want me to hear about, or maybe you'd like me to know about you, make sure to reach out to me at podcastersunited.org, where you can check out where we've put my show, right? Where we've donated my show at Podcasters United. So go check that out and apply to be on the Binge Factor. I'd love to talk with you soon. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm Tracy Hazard. I'll be back next time with another Bingeable podcaster.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.